Yeah. Good morning. I'm glad to see all of you here. I'm going to open us with a prayer today. There's one in the prayer book I love that I thought of in anticipation of our conversation this morning. The Lord be with you. Also with you. Let's pray. This is a prayer for the human family. O God, you made us in your own image and redeemed us through Jesus, your Son. Look with compassion on the whole human family. Take away the arrogance and hatred which infect our hearts. Break down the walls that separate us. Unite us in bonds of love. And work through our struggle and confusion to accomplish your purposes on earth, that in your good time all nations and races may serve you in harmony around your heavenly throne. Through Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen. I thought of that because these two people are very much engaged in this kind of work, and I'm really grateful to have Dr. Ernestine Jenkins and Rich Watkins, who've given yet more of their time to Calvary to come and talk about who they are and why they're in this work. I'll give you a quick thumbnail, but they'll tell you more about who they are in the conversation, I think, to come. Dr. Ernestine Jenkins, she's a scholar of art history and visual studies at the University of Memphis. When I poked around, I found this phrase: she's especially interested in the dynamic response to centuries of exchange throughout the African diaspora across regions, cultures, and histories. There's a lot in that. Maybe we'll unpack that today, but her recent publications include Black Artists in America, From the Great Depression to Civil Rights, and Race Representation and Photography in 19th Century Memphis, From Slavery to Jim Crow. About a little over a year ago, she curated Black Artists in America, From Civil Rights to the Bicentennial at the Dixon Museum. So, welcome to Ernestine. Rich Watkins is a Memphis native. He graduated, I do this research to introduce people. I thought I knew. And he graduated with a chemistry degree from Morehouse, and then a law degree from Georgetown. He's practiced in Philadelphia, Chicago, now works for Medtronic in Memphis. We got to know Rich through his work as president of the Lynching Sites Project. He's still involved. He's rolled off and welcomed a new president in that role, which is a civil rights and social action organization devoted to fostering a new legacy of racial equity and justice by turning the light of truth on lynchings in Shelby County, Tennessee. See, I found some words that were better than I would have just rambled on, but you can maybe say more about that in the days to come. But again, both of these folks have given so much time and expertise and friendship over the last couple of years toward this 87 Adams project. I'm really thrilled that y'all will have a few minutes to get to know them a little bit better in the days to come. Welcome, the hour to come. And we'll do this as we usually do. We'll try to have some conversation as we get closer to the hour. Rich has a family event. He may have to scoot pretty quickly at the top of the hour, but we'll leave some time for questions, so bring your questions. I'd love for each of you to expand a little bit on my little bio of each of you. You know, tell us about where you grew up, what drew you into art history, law. How do you spend your time when you're not at church talking to curious people? Either of you can go.
Can you hear me well? Okay. I was born in Memphis, and I spent 15 years away studying, but I always knew that I would come back to Memphis, especially because my mother was always saying that go off and study, but make sure you come back here. You know, there really wasn't any question. This is my home. I love it. I've lived all over the world. I don't want to be any place else except Memphis. I think it's very special. I think of myself as probably the first generation of African Americans that were actually born in Memphis, because my parents, my mother's people, the family name is Faust, they were owned by German people in Alamance County, North Carolina. And so her grandfather, my great-grandfather, Anderson Faust, came to Tennessee after the Civil War in the 1870s. So that family migrated from Brownsville, Tennessee in 1923 to Memphis. My father's family is from Hernando, Mississippi. His grandfather, Sam Mineral Jenkins, actually migrated to Memphis in the 1910s. He was born a slave in Mississippi, but he learned to read and write because, according to family tradition, the white kids in the family taught him how to read and write. And so he got his certificate to teach in Mississippi during the 1890s. And so he ended up coming and teaching at Lemoyne Normal Institute when he was one of the first black teachers there. If you know anything about American Missionary Association schools that were founded for blacks, most of the teachers were initially white and from the East. And so he was one of the first black teachers there at Lemoyne Normal Institute in the 1920s and 1930s. So that's my family history. I was always interested in the arts. I always studied art and history from like elementary school. I have a BA in painting from Spelman College, an MA in art history from when it was the Memphis State University, and a PhD from Michigan State. My MA was in art history, but my PhD is in African history. I did my field work in Ethiopia, where I was studying 19th century Christian art in Ethiopia. Ethiopia has been a Christian country since the 4th century. And so my scholarship is all of those fields. It's both art and history. It's best described as visual culture studies. And I consider myself a historian, not so much art historian, but that's my title for my work, for my job, at the University of Memphis.
Well, hi, thank you, and it's really great to be here this morning, and thank you, Scott, for inviting me, and it's good to be amongst Calvary once again in this still relatively new space. Hope you guys are enjoying everything that has been renovated over the last, 18 months or so. Gosh, how do I simplify mine? Well, Rich Watkins is my name. My mom's family is from Mississippi, from Coldwater, Mississippi. And they got here by way of Virginia. My grandfather's grandparents were wedding presents for a couple that was moving from Virginia down to Mississippi. And at some point, my grandfather's grandmother was, or I believe his mother was biracial. And she said that she wanted all of her kids and grandkids to know how to read. So he learned how to read at a very early age when others were not afforded that benefit. And so when he was coming up, he eventually fathered 9 children. He was a sharecropper, but in the wintertime, he would work at the post office here in Memphis and raise enough money to actually, buy his land. Whereas others, again, did not have that opportunity to own their own land. And as some of you may know, sharecropping was a very, very horrible industry at the time. It was akin to an indentured servitude because of the credits and debts that held over people for a long time. He was able to get out from under that. And with that, with his 9 kids, he sent them all to either college or the military. Yeah, college or the military or the priesthood, reverend. So all of them made it out and had a score of grandchildren, and including me and great-grandchildren, and the legacy lives on. My father's family is from West Tennessee, Mason-Somerville area. My last name is Watkins. I think there is some history in West Tennessee of the last name of Watkins. Maybe there's something there. We haven't done a family history on that side of my family. He eventually made his way down to Memphis after serving in Vietnam, met my mother, and here I am. I grew up in Memphis. Unlike Ernestine, I didn't know that I would be moving back. I was a patent attorney by training because I have a hard science degree, and I like the law, and I really like science. I like STEM. I like figuring things out, problems. As a kid, my aunts would hide their valuable things because I always wanted to take them apart. But I wanted to figure things out. I always had questions. I wanted to figure things out. And went on to law school at Georgetown in D.C. and practiced in these other cities. And I didn't think I would be coming back to Memphis because there's no known patent law firm in Memphis, and my business isn't there, my industry isn't there. Why would I ever move back? And someone had sent me a notice about an opportunity at Medtronic, medical device company. As some of you may remember, it used to be Sophomore Danic, or even Sophomore back in the day. And they were looking for a patent attorney. And I just got married and wanted to have a family, and I have scores of family here. And so I moved on down, and my wife decided to follow with me. And we're here now. I got involved in this work because we visited the Equal Justice Initiative's museum down in Montgomery, Alabama. And I was very, very moved by it. And I turned to my wife and had said, when we get back to Memphis, I want to be involved in whoever's doing this work in Memphis, because I went to school here in Memphis. I graduated from Central High School, and I had no idea. We weren't taught lynchings in school. We knew about the concept of lynching, but we didn't know, there were these many here in Memphis, and this is what happened. Never even mentioned. So I had a mix of emotions with that. Curiosity, of course, but also I was kind of upset, like, wait, this happened in Memphis. And if you're from Memphis and you go to a school elsewhere, and I've talked with other folks of my cohort, if you will, that go off to school, we have a bit of a chip on our shoulder, if you notice about Memphis. And for this not to be shared with me, I felt some kind of way about that. And so when I got back to Memphis, I found the Lynching Sites Project, and I've just been involved in volunteering with them ever since. So, yeah.
Thank you both. I love the placing your story in this longer family history. Lots of things come up in that. One, it's interesting that both in your families there was this, in spite of the culture refusing to educate your forebears, someone found a way in to learn. Somebody invaded that system, and it's amazing to see it tumbling across generations. Just a reminder of both directions, powerful when people are bereft of a gift, how it can be so hamstrung for a future generation. Anyway, thank you for placing your stories, and really that's what this project's been about, fleshing out these stories a little bit more. When I was at EJI for the first time, I remember getting around to Pulaski County. I'd just come from Little Rock, and a friend had written a book that had investigated the last lynching, and I looked up at Pulaski County, and the one name, John Peterson, I think was his name, and to come down and see his name and realize a whole story unfolds behind every single human in that space is powerful. I'd love for you to layer in, if you don't mind, religion. Since we're a church and you knew you were coming, I actually met Ayanna before I met Rich in some clergy circles, so Rich is a clergy spouse as well. But how did religion factor in, for better or for worse, in your stories?
Well, for me, as an African American growing up in the South, I don't conceive of a way in which I would not have grown up in the church. So, an interesting sort of dynamic is that my family on my mother's side, the Fauces, when they migrated from Brownsville, Haywood County in 1923, they joined Greenwood CME Church. And my father's people, being from Hernando, Mississippi, the Baptist church was stronger there. And so remember when he migrated to Memphis after World War II, he was a member of East Trigg Baptist Church, the church that just burned a few months ago. So I went to both churches, but sometimes in the black community, it's the mother's church that sort of outweighs they have to be different. So that's officially the church that I grew up in. The old Greenwood CME Church is still standing there on Bellevue, but the Greenwood CME Church moved over to Kimball. And that church is the largest CME church in the area. If you don't know the history, you know that in terms of religious history, The CME Church used to be the Colored Methodist Episcopal Church. It's very dominant in this region because the CME Church was historically founded in Jackson, Tennessee, the area Lane College. It's very prominent. So many African Americans are CME in their church. You're going to your homecoming. When we have family reunions, we would go to our homecoming at Prospect CME Church there in Haywood County in Brownsville. And it's an important history because Memphis, with this large CME presence, the CME Church being one of your important black denominations that was founded in this region, along with the Church of God in Christ. And then we also have the AME Church. So Memphis is very strong historically in terms of the presence of those historic black churches. I don't go to church now. I consider myself very spiritual. I consider my work a mission. My approach to my work, I take from a spiritual basis. And what I mean by that is it's a search and an interest in my people's history, which is also, from a broad perspective, humanitarian history, the history of everybody. I always approach that subject and the history of the African American experience, the African diaspora experience, with respect. I question boundaries that people don't want me to penetrate, and I don't do that. So I'm very conscious about how I approach the subject with respect, with thanks for the people dead and gone who are no longer here anymore, but I think that they overlook the work that I do. I feel that. And that I wouldn't be doing certain things if I did not have their sanction to do it. You know, I get asked to do a lot of projects. I say no to most of them because of my time. I said yes to this one because I believe in the importance of the city of Memphis coming to grips with its history. Memphis has not done that. And I think it's because of the long-term racial issues that we've had in the city, and that Memphis has yet to recognize that this city's development, it's important to recognize how important blacks were to the city's development, and that has not been done yet. You would not have Memphis without African Americans. And that doesn't denigrate or lessen in any way the importance of all other ethnicities and races that have to do with the history of this city. But until we do that, we're not going to be able to move forward like we should. So that's why I said yes to this project.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ernestine. Religion, church, to me, it's community. Church is community. And similar to Ernestine, growing up here in Memphis, you're going to church on Sunday morning. There's no question of where you're going to be. So I grew up in the church, and at first, as a little kid, it's about community. Your friends, your family, your Sunday school teacher. And you look at the black church, and not just black churches, I mean, you guys are a community as well. Your kids and grandkids, they go to Sunday school, they have their friends here, and they also learn a bit of history as well. They have respect for their Sunday school teachers and their pastors. Similarly here. So with that, I began to appreciate learning things from older generations and understanding that chain. They mentioned I'm going to my mother's church, where she grew up, their homecoming down in Coldwater, Mississippi, as soon as I leave here. And this is actually a picture of my grandfather, her dad. They had a community there as well. And when you think of the history of this country, unfortunately, a lot of black people, they had to go to church in order to be leaders, to be good stewards, to learn those things. So for me, going to church and practicing a religion was about seeing models of how to be a good citizen, as well as a good Christian. And of course, all of the teachings that Christianity teaches us. So coming to this work was right in line with that. You know, of course, the morality aspect is there, but seeing how the deacons of the church and the mothers of the church conducted themselves and handled the business of the church helps me in business, but also with LSP and how things should be when we do our work as well. Hope that.
No, that's really, thank you both. And Ernestine, thank you for framing both your relationship with ancestors and both of you in terms of this spirituality. Because it occurs to me, as both of you were talking, even thinking through your stories, thinking back across generations, how both harm and gifts can roll across generations, I think we are being, maybe we don't use the language of spirituality all the time, but when we talk about structural sins and things that flow through, or racism that flows through me, even though I'm trying with my head to be someone different, but knowing these are spiritual questions, it does seem like maybe we need a vocabulary, whether it's church or not, that's that alludes to the way we're shaped in our spiritual lives. I don't know. Does that make sense to y'all? That these are spiritual questions in a way, if you're comfortable with that language. Even though we need to change the laws, even though we need to change the economy, it's hard to get into this work without talking about what makes us do who we are as humans, what motivates us, what stirs us.
Well, that's why I often add, not that I...
We got to hear you. We want to hear every word.
Yeah.
I'm a soft-spoken Southern, so yeah, I know that. It's the reason I often add, though I don't feel like I should have to, that I'm a spiritual person. Yeah, because right. Even within the Black community that I grew up with, my friends and relatives, they accept that and they know that. But sometimes I get asked, well, why don't you go to church? And I'm like, well, it's not your business. I don't have to. I don't have to go to church. And when I use the word spirituality and I say that I'm a spiritual person, and then also it has to be part of how I frame my teaching every day in class, because I teach, mostly the non-European arts and visual cultures, and I have to explain a lot of indigenous people's perspective on spirituality, and explain to many other students that may come from traditional, and I don't mean that in a negative way, traditional Christian churches and homes, and have an idea about Christianity as it's expressed in the European or white expression without any historical background to how it came to be that particular manifestation of Christianity, that we're really all talking about the same thing. And when I say spirituality, I'm talking about an expression of the soul, the spirit, that has nothing to do with whether you identify a certain historical figure with a religion. What I'm talking about is far too complex and beyond human understanding to make it gender identified or racial identified or ethnicity identified, but we're all fundamentally talking about the same thing. That's what I mean when I talk about the spirituality that guides me in life. I have nothing against it, but it doesn't need a formal organization of the church, though I respect that fully and fully understand the need that human beings have for that, need that, and the good that that does. But just for me, at this particular point in my life, I prefer to have that freedom that goes with how I define, And I very much appreciate having grown up in the Black church. Don't get me wrong. Very much appreciate that. But that's how I've come at my age and certain time in history. That's how I operate.
That's really helpful. Preach. That's beautiful. Thoughts on that?
Well, I had a thought on your question, and one of the things I got from it was different communities learning how to talk with one another, because the lessons of the Bible or religion, period, teach us that many of the things that have happened in history's past, let alone our countries or going on now, are wrong. We know this already, okay? But for whatever reason, things happen, whether we vote a certain way or whether we do a certain thing or not do a certain thing or not speak, it interrupts that. And being able to talk with one another and sharing each other's stories and backgrounds help bridge that gap. And one of the missions of LSP is to create safe spaces so people can talk about the past racial violence that happened in our communities and race relations, but creating that safe space where science can come and talk with one another and share that experience as a way of growing together. And I think that's also a mission of the Equal Justice Initiative as well. That's why I really like the work of 87 Adams and being a part of it, because it shows that this congregation, this community, wants to have this conversation. They want to create a space where people can come and talk about this part of the history of Memphis. And that's one of the things I got from your question. And I think religion can hamper that. It can get in the way of that sometimes. But in other ways, it can help that. It can help in fostering that conversation, like today. So,
thank you both for that. That's really helpful to me. Is there an LSP project that you can think of that might crystallize what you're describing? You're talking about this reconciling work, this truth-telling work. One that you would describe for folks maybe who haven't experienced one of your projects?
Sure. A couple of things come to mind. One is having critical conversations. We have community meetings once a month, and some of the community meetings are like committee meetings where we just talk about the day-to-day. Hey, here's a project that we're working on. And in others, it's just sitting in a circle, and some of us they have these cards. They have different names now. One, I think the original might have been like race cards. I forgot the name of the other one, but it's a card that asks a question, and then we discuss that question, dealing with race relations. And again, it's sitting in a circle, answering that question, pondering that question together as a community. That's one of the things we do during our community meetings. Another project we had was we had a first season of a podcast that talked about the history of lynchings here in Memphis with historians, local business owners, local politicians who talked about the first time that they had heard about lynchings. Getting those stories out to folks. So
I love that, especially for our perspective. So there's the Lynching Sites Project will identify a place, make sure a marker gets there to tell the story, and then this is the kind of stuff that can flow out of that work. That's exactly what we hope the shape of what happens here will be. That's super helpful. Ernestine, I've loved hearing you talk on multiple occasions about the nature of urban slavery. This is something she really contributed to our conversations about this. Could you say something about that, how you got curious about it, and some of the distinctiveness that you've tried to tease it out? Because we often have a plantation, rural picture in our minds when we think of slavery, and Rich is going to hand you that microphone so we don't miss a word.
I see why you were laughing. That research initially came out of, like I said, when I came back to Memphis, I wasn't expecting to work on Memphis history so much, although I always knew that history was there. But that came out of working on the book on 19th century Black photographic traditions in Memphis from slavery to Jim Crow. There are very few people, only a handful of people who work with 19th century historic Black photography. And of course, it had never been done in Memphis. And so that took me 7 years to work on that book. And working on that, I really wanted to start with slavery, because for us scholars who study historic African-American photography, we have to use the work of Frederick Douglass, who we now know was the most photographed person in the 19th century. Most photographs of Frederick Douglass because of his work as a famous Black abolitionist. And so Frederick Douglass was the first person to write theoretically about photography, because he was so photographed, and he became concerned, like we are on social media today, about the proliferation of his image and losing control over it. And so he began to talk in the 1860s during the Civil War, one of his most famous speeches about photography was Pictures in Progress. And he was saying that when black people became free, then photography, which was a democratic medium, unlike elite art and painting, that black people were going to be able to use photography because it was accessible to create their own image and the way that they wanted to be seen, as opposed to the negative images of them that had proliferated. And so I began to look for those images of blacks in Memphis. I amassed my own small collection of photographs of blacks in Memphis from the 1870s to about the 1940s. And then I found in the local archives in the Pink Palace Museum a few handful of photographs of 19th century enslaved black people in Memphis. And so I had to write about, how do I write about that? And so I had to write about those pictures within the context of urban slavery, because they were urban slaves. One of them was a picture from 1850 of Catherine Hunt, which is now in the Library of Congress, and she worked in the Hunt Phelan House, which is that house that's still standing on the east end of Beale Street. And her family was one of 3 black families that I documented along with the Hunt family that I just talked about, Blair T. Hunt. And those families, they were separate enslaved families, and they married each other, okay? And I was able to trace her through the documents, didn't find any more photographs until 1899 when she died, and she's buried in Zion Cemetery. So I had to write a history about, because it had never been done, about the experience of enslaved black people in Memphis. And as we study as historians, we study all of the different manifestations of slavery. We have a stereotype of slavery in the United States as being rural plantation slavery. Memphis wasn't a site for rural plantation slavery. It's surrounded by rural plantations that own slaves. But Memphis itself is a site of urban slavery, which means that the slaves in Memphis did urban work. You know, they did any type of work, repairing the roads, working as domestic servants inside of people's households. Everybody in Memphis who was white and able to afford it would have had a domestic servant or 2 who was an enslaved individual working in their family, okay? Many of your Memphians who were involved in the cotton industry lived in what were considered townhouses in Memphis, but they would have had large rural plantations where they may have owned up to several hundred slaves, like the family that originally owned the Hunt Phelan House. And so they had their rural plantation where they had almost 300 slaves near Tupelo, Mississippi. And then that house was their urban house. It was the type of house that you moved into if you made good as a slave owner and you wanted to move to the city. So even in the documents, you could see where he would move his slaves that were working on the rural plantation in Mississippi. He would sometimes send them up here to work in Memphis at the Hunt Phelan House. And in his will, when he died in 1850, he talks about his blacksmiths who were enslaved, the oldest one being Blair, whom he had been owned by the family since the late 18th century, how he instructed Blair and the other blacksmith slaves that he owned. They were to work on the house and build the columns that you see on the front of that house now. When he initially purchased the house, it didn't have the columns that you see on the front now. He instructed the slaves in his will, because he died a year later, to make those columns on the front of the house and move the little small entrance that was on the front of the house to the side, which is where you see it now. So that's sort of in a nutshell what you have to think about when you think about the distinction between enslaved African Americans that worked in a city like Memphis as opposed to enslaved African Americans who worked on the stereotypical idea of what the slave experience is. It's very diverse and it's very different.
Yeah, that's fascinating. That's fascinating that you went in that visually, that photography visually drew you into this story that was more complex. Well, time for a couple more before we have questions, I think, but I want to make sure these folks can ask questions. Is there more either of you, both of you would like to say about what you hope for the space that we're trying to? We're in the middle of this process. We've had a couple of community meetings. We haven't scheduled a third. So some of the flow is taking shape on a conceptual level for those who haven't been able to be at one of the community meetings. But what are your hopes at this vantage for what 87 Adams might do and be? And you can answer that programmatically, physically, whatever strikes you.
Well, for me, on a couple of levels, my hope is a green space. You know, growing up here in Memphis and spending weekends in the summer in the country, I always loved green space, and I live in urban areas, and I know how valuable green space is. Having a green space in the middle of downtown, another one I think is just a plus. But also, I am looking forward to it being another portal of learning about who we are. You know, how far we've come, where we've been, and hopefully where we want to go. That's really my overall hope for this thing, for people to come, particularly kids, because as I said, I grew up, I didn't know any of this history, and I don't think that should be the case for anyone who is growing up in Memphis learning about their own history, that they learn about this and know that, hey, this is where this community, our community came from, and we've learned or learning this lesson. Yeah, that's my overall hope for it. I do have a question for you, but I want to have.
Well, mine is very, very similar. I think really a distinction about this project, which I alluded to before, is there are cities and counties all across the country that are beginning, particularly after the Black Lives Matter movement, that are questioning the idea of monuments and who we honor, and especially the lack of Reconstruction history that has been done. And so it's really important for places that have such a important legacy of slavery to tell those stories, and those are the stories that have not been told. And so for Memphis, this is really going to be the first time that we deal with the history of slavery in the city. So it's very significant.
What is, Scott, you of course have been working on this for quite some time. What is your hope for your congregation to take away from this work?
Well, I've been I've tried to say it. The tricky thing for me, and hopefully it's full of possibility and energy too, from Calvary's perspective, has always been, how do we take responsibility and claim what is ours and hold it loosely enough to let that space become what the city needs to be, what the history, with the broader history, what story needs to be told. And so for me, it's a balance, and I think it can work. Actually, it's interesting now. I've never thought of it until just now in terms of these renovations. We had ideas, if a place could be shaped in a certain way, we think it might draw people into conversation and relationship in a different way. If you don't have a web of hallways, you might meet somebody, you might minister, you might have a conversation. So probably it's something analogous to that it's a vibrant, inviting, contemplative, truthful space where there's room for things to happen that we can't think of right now. That's what I get most excited about. A really vibrant space invites people who wouldn't have been here, ideas that we wouldn't have come up with on our own because we don't have the stories or the knowledge or the experiences, So I think if it's really successful in the ways that we hope it is, it'll be very concrete and vibrant and flourishing, which will also be then a place that brings people in and brings things out of us that we didn't expect. Conversations, events, art, hopefully healed relationships, all kinds of those kind of things. It's a little vague, but that's kind of where I am. Does that make sense to you?
Yes, thanks.
Yeah? Thanks. Yeah, thanks for the question. I don't want to. I think we have time for one more. I don't want to finish without acknowledging our heartbreak over Claiborne Temple this week. It's just devastating. Anasa spoke at Calvary about a year ago. last fall, not even a year ago yet, and brought her irrepressible, beautiful energy into our spaces, and just really a devastating. Do y'all have thoughts, maybe experiences about? It's fresh, but what that place means to you and to Memphis, to our story, and ultimately, I hope we can be friends to that place and help it flourish again in whatever ways it can.
For me, I'm still processing it. I did go by there, I guess, that Monday afternoon. Space means something to us. And just to see it gutted like that, the stained glass windows gone, the smoke still rising, but the walls gone. The tower was still there. There are things that are still there. I felt a loss because of what it meant to Memphis. I'm hopeful for what is going to rise from the ashes, what Anasa is going to do. I know the mayor has pledged the city is behind rebuilding. I'm eager to see what that's going to look like. But it hit hard. Yeah.
I had several thoughts about that. To my way of thinking, we've lost two important historical black churches in Memphis. I mentioned East Trigg Baptist Church. And just in terms of history, in case you don't know, East Trigg Baptist Church was the home church of Herbert Brewster, who is considered, along with Lucy B. Campbell, who is also from Memphis, two of the three architects now of gospel music. That's how important he was to the culture legacy. Everybody from Mahalia Jackson to Sam Cooke used to come to East Trigg Church to get Herbert Brewster to write them a song. And my father was buried at that church. And so that church to me is more historically significant personally than Claiborne Temple is. I think that both of the churches need to be investigated, and they said they're going to do that because of the times that we live in. I don't rule out that it was arson. But whether or not if it was arson because of a white supremacist activity, or whether or not it was arson because vagrants were in the church and set fire to it, which is what some people think happened to East Trigg Baptist Church. It's still an issue of dealing with our complicated history, either way. If it was arson because poor people had to find a home in the church and burnt it up by accident, then again, those issues of economic issues, neglect in a community, lack of support for so many black communities in Memphis that have been de-invested in, which is why those people felt the need to break into the church and try to start a fire to keep warm on a cold night. And so there are no questions about if it's arson for the other reason. For the future, I think that they do need to rebuild the church. The fact that there was a burning of it puts it very much within the long historical terrorism of burning black churches, if it was intentional. But the burning in and of itself becomes part of the historical legacy. So now you have to reshape how they will approach the rebuilding of the church, because now it has to incorporate this very tragic event that happened to it.
Yeah. Wow.
It has to be part of the storytelling.
Yeah. Thank you both. Do you have to scoot? Do you have time for a minute?
Yeah.
What questions? Yeah. What questions do y'all have? That was splendid. Thank you for your time. Yeah, right here.
Thank you so much for both of you for your work and for being here this morning. I'm wondering what connections you see between telling these stories and then efforts to promote a more just society, particularly reparations. So that work of telling the story and then trying to create more justice, if you see any connections there.
It's definitely connected. I think, well, when we look at how we make laws, for instance, how we used to make laws, there'd be investigations and people would do studies and let's have a committee and let's talk about it. There is a finding of facts, right? Where we agree on a set of facts. Okay, now that we agree on the set of facts, let us craft a law that we believe addresses all of these things and these failings so that we can move on in a good way. What we're doing here with 87 Adams and the work of LSP and Dr. Jenkins is we're trying to find facts. History is still uncovered in a lot of ways, and we're trying to find facts and get the facts out there so that one day, when we agree again to have a common set of facts, we can craft policies as a community on how to be more just, whether it's, reparations, thank you, whether it's reparations or how to deal with homelessness or what have you. You know, going back to Ida B. Wells, one of the best ways to cure racism or to attack it is to shine a light on it. And finding facts is a way of doing that. So I don't think that there's any harm in doing research and finding facts, funding national institutions that do research, things like that. That's all for the good. So I think this is all a part of that work, and that's how it goes hand in hand with it. And it's the work that doesn't get like a lot of like praise because it goes on in the background, whether it's in the archives of the Pink Palace or the Memphis the City Room in the library, but it's the work that needs to be done. Okay, it's not marching in the streets, which in a lot of instances needs to be done, but this also needs to be done because at some point you need to sit down at the table, okay, this is what happened, and this is what led to this, and here are the facts.
I think the same way. I think often when I decide to take on a project, I just let the project itself and how it evolves guide me. I don't worry too much if that is the correct word about the outcome, because I think the process is what is so important and how you get to the outcome. And I trust in that, and so it just, in some ways I leave those broader issues to sort of resolve themselves. The reference to reparations, I think people get caught up in the word itself and they get blocked. But actually, if you keep your ear to the ground, reparations is actually going on already, and in a lot of different ways. I think of this as reparation. Reparation it's not about giving somebody a paycheck. It's so many other ways, that you can engage the idea of dealing with the past truthfully, and in that trying to not make up for it, because you can't really do that, but understand it, acknowledge it, and move forward from that position, if you can get to that position. Yeah.
Repair is a good word. If we don't think we need to repair.
Good morning. My little family has, in the last month, spent a good bit of time at T.O. Fuller State Park, and I'm raised here, never been there before until the last month. Never really spent any time in that sleepy part of the county. But it's really been a thought-provoking time because we were able to talk to our kids that originally it was Shelby County Negro Park, and I did not know that Meeman Shelby Forest was the white park, and that was the African American park. And ironically, as they're excavating their pool, they discover these, lost Native American artifacts. It's just a profound place. But the bigger part to me is Boxtown. And so as I'm listening to you guys talk about the funding for different projects and urban slavery, I'm thinking about, and many of you may not know in the room, I didn't know, perhaps you're hopefully more than likely more informed than me, but Boxtown was the first community really founded of African Americans in our county after the emancipation. So, are these people in that area descendants of urban slavery, rural, combo? Are there ongoing projects? Because Elon is moving in hard on that area, and when you camp there, you smell the treatment center that is wafting through the air. You don't smell that in Shelby Forest, so there's just so much injustice embedded in that area long before even African Americans, going back to our Native American roots, obviously. But I'm not familiar with what is happening with the Boxtown history and how that could encourage stronger support for the supercomputer that's coming, whether we like it or not. But I hope my question makes sense.
Well, I went to school in that area because when my parents moved out of historic South Memphis, they bought land and moved into Whitehaven. And so they were one of the first blacks to move into Whitehaven before the integration started. And so we were then the Shelby County schools. And so I went to school with my mother, who was the librarian, founded the librarian at Ford Road Elementary School until 6th grade, till I had to integrate Whitehaven Elementary School, which was not a pleasant experience. But that Chucalissa was one of the few public spaces on segregated days, I think it was Thursdays, that black kids could go to, along with the zoo on Thursdays. So that was one of our regular field excursions. One of the few that we had in the city was to be able to go to T.O. Fuller Park and to visit Chucalissa. And T.O. Fuller is one of the few, I think it's one of only 2 state parks that's named after African American. And Thomas Fuller came here from North Carolina after the riots in the 1890s in North Carolina, and became the minister at First Baptist Church, and then became the principal of Howe Institute. Richard Wright, a fair number of prominent African Americans went to Howe Institute, and a lot of people don't know that Thomas Fuller's long-term goal was to found a college for blacks in Memphis. He had purchased the land there at the corner of South Parkway and Bellevue, and the white people in Memphis fought him on building that college for blacks in Memphis. And what he did was he was part of the black leadership in Memphis that helped to finally get Lemoyne Normal Institute accredited as a college in 1934. So Thomas Fuller was very instrumental in all of that. And he had to work with Crump. And so it was the reason that after he died, a few years after Fuller Park was the park was founded, it was named after Fuller because of his work here in the city, and much respected by African Americans, and wrote several well-regarded history books on African Americans. And unfortunately, all of his papers were in the library there on Vance, the black library there on Vance, which white firefighters in Memphis burnt down in the 1970s, purposely burnt down in the 1970s when they were fighting integration and unions and all of that. Yeah. Just like Crump burnt down the church mansion as a fire exercise in the 1940s. So these public spaces, physical spaces of black resistance, they're very political, which ties into the need to preserve the church, even though it's been burned down.
One of my favorite phrases that I've heard Ernestine say over and over is, a lot of people don't know. And then she unfolds, 4 generations of deep history in the place you've just asked about. Thank you to you both for all that you've given to this project already, but thanks for being here this morning, giving people a taste of who you are and what you do in the world. I'm grateful. Next week, we're making space for Paul, who will be his last Sunday with us, and he's going to, before he goes to Tresvant, heads to the east. So come join us to hear from Paul and say farewell, or say bye for a minute. We know where Highland is. It's not exactly West Nashville. All right, go in peace. Thanks all.